All right, in the last video, we discussed the sensing functions, sensing and intuiting, as well as the judging functions, thinking and feeling. We talked about what those functions mean, as well as touched upon the fact that those functions can be split into an extroverted variant and an introverted variant. So let's continue where we left off and examine the perceiving side of things a little bit further. Remember that perceiving is the process of taking in information, and we do that by sensing and intuiting. Now we're going to break those down even further into individual perceiving cognitive functions. In this video specifically, we're going to be covering the sensing functions. If you remember from the previous video, sensing is how we take in information via our senses, as well as how we recall experiences that we've had in the past via our memory. Okay, first, let's break down sensing into its extroverted and introverted variants. Extroverted sensing will be written as capital S, lowercase e, and introverted sensing will be written as capital S, lowercase I. Note that from this point on, I'm going to be hopping back and forth between saying the full cognitive function name and its two-letter sequence. For instance, sometimes when I'm talking about extroverted sensing, I'll say SE, and sometimes when I'm talking about introverted sensing, I'll say SI, and so on. I'll also be adding visual cues every time I say any cognitive function, just so this stuff starts to get lodged into your memory. Also, you might be wondering exactly what introverted and extroverted even means. I think the common understanding of these terms typically associates introverted with introverted people who like to be alone. Extroverted then is associated with extroverted people who like to be around people. For the record, that is a vast oversimplification of those terms and also just incorrect as well. And in future videos, I will clarify what it means to be an introverted person or an extroverted person. But for now, we're just talking about cognitive functions. In simple terms, introverted means from the inside. That is, the source is from inside your mind. Extroverted then means on the outside, from outside of your mind. As I describe each cognitive function, you'll get to see what this means in context. So let's jump in. Extroverted sensing, or SE, is probably a little bit easier to understand, so we'll start there. Extroverted sensing is all about the experiencing of the here and now. It's an active engagement with your physical surroundings using your senses. It's taking in objective outside sensory information, i.e. extroverted or outside oneself information, and it's processing it rapidly. It is engaged by any type of sensory experience, and it's more actively engaged the more stimulating any particular sensory experience is. It's used in the active engagement with your external surroundings in as real and grounded of a way as possible. A pure expression of SE is living in the moment, or even being one with the moment. Activities that really tap into this function are things like sports, or honestly really most complex physical activity. It's also engaged in things like acting and performing, or say, smelling and tasting food. It can also be used alongside other cognitive functions to augment activities that you might not naturally assume are physically stimulating. Things like high-stakes selling or business negotiation, where watching people's micro-expressions and their body language and then quickly adapting to that information is very important. Extroverted sensing is very good at being adaptable in the moment. It prefers to act on instinct to solve problems rather than having to do planning beforehand. SE enjoys putting the mind into a state of what's going to happen next, let's go, where it can energetically improvise. People who use extroverted sensing as a strength tend to be attracted to jobs that allow them to energetically engage with situations in real time. This includes professional athletes, stage performers, and emergency first responders. On the other hand, people whose minds don't highly value SE tend to have a bit of a diminished experience of sensory stimuli. They might be prone to thinking food is fuel rather than as a sensational experience worth savoring. They might be a bit clumsier or at least disengaged with their environment and a little bit more prone to being stuck inside their own head. Okay, so let's move on to introverted sensing, or SI. SI is a type of sensing that is done on information that is stored inside your mind, that is, introverted information. It's a type of sensing that's done after the fact, where you look back on things that have already happened. You can do this to make sense of what happened, learn from what happened, or even just to enjoy a memory. Using this function also allows you to become accustomed to whatever it was that you experienced. The next time you experience that thing, introverted sensing will provide you a feeling of comfort or discomfort depending on your personal experience with it. Think about it. When you experience something new, that experience shifts from being something completely new and novel to something that you have a little bit more familiarity with. And the more times you repeat that experience, the more comfortable and familiar it becomes. If you repeat it enough times, it almost becomes part of your identity to engage in that experience, and it would start to feel uncomfortable to not repeat that experience. Maybe you have a routine where you absolutely need to clean the kitchen before going to bed, and if you don't, you'll be filled with a bit of a sense of anxiety because you're not following your normal routine. This process is largely mediated via introverted sensing. For another example, maybe the first time you tried a new food, you weren't really sure if you liked it that much because you were also somewhat overwhelmed by the fact that the food was just so new. But the next day, maybe you're thinking, maybe that wasn't so bad and you kind of want to try it again. And the second time you have it, it's better than the first time. And the third time is even better than that. And the food's not really weird to you anymore. On the other hand, of course, you can also create negative associations as well. Maybe you went on a long hike out in nature and you sprained your ankle and then had a torturous time getting home. From then on, maybe the thought of hiking starts to fill you with a bit of sense of dread and you become very resistant to trying it again. Introverted sensing is what encompasses that internal feeling of familiarity or unfamiliarity, comfort and discomfort with experiences that you have experienced in your personal history. It remembers things that were positive and negative, and it looks to repeat the positive experiences and dissuade you from ever partaking in the negative experiences again. In order to do this, there's a heavy reliance on memory, which again is just a subjective recollection of past experiences. People who use introverted sensing as a strength then tend to have very good memories, and they tend to enjoy doing the same things over and over and over and over again. They, more than other types, have a deep sense that what they do determines who they are. They're constantly cultivating their identity based on the actions they take and the rituals they repeat. They have a deep level of comfort associated with the things that they know, and so they can often end up, say, watching the same TV show over and over and over again, or listening to the same music over and over and over again. The flip side of this is they also tend to be careful not to partake in activities that they're not at least a little bit comfortable with, or that they can at least anchor to an experience that they're already at least a bit comfortable with. They appreciate being careful and cautious so that they don't end up in a situation that they're unprepared for. They really dislike disruptive influences that, to them, are prone to break rules and cause disorder. They also have a very high attention to detail, which allows them to build deep competence in certain areas of interest because they'll keep at it far longer than most people who would otherwise get bored. People who use SI a lot also tend to be very trustworthy, loyal, and dependable, and they're not really prone to changing their mind on a whim. On the other hand, high usage of introverted sensing can also make some people rigidly attached to certain experiences or conclusions that they have. This can make them seem boring or closed-minded to people who don't enjoy using SI as much. For those people who don't use SI as a strength, they tend to be a little bit more interested in optimistic possibilities of how things might go and aren't as comfortably attached to what they already know. All right, in a nutshell, that's sensing. In the next video, we'll be covering intuition to round out the perceiving functions. And by the way, while it might seem like there's a lot of information to take in all at once, remember that we are just building out individual pieces of a larger puzzle here. It will become way clearer once we have all of these puzzle pieces in play and you can get a clearer view of the big picture. I promise.